Miles Taylor, welcome back to Mea Culpa. Good to see you, my friend. Lots to talk about, lots going on. Hour goes by too quick. We're going to get right into it. So look, Miles, you've seen firsthand how Trump handles disloyalty and perceived threats. What do you make of this exchange, this feud with Elon Musk? You think that Trump views him as a genuine political rival, or do you think this is just another ego clash with a billionaire who's stealing his spotlight?
Well, I certainly think Elon is an unexpected resistance figure for the second term of the Trump administration. But I do think that the president is probably very worried. He's probably very worried about what Elon knows and the level of impact he could have on this administration. I mean, there's an old adage that 10,000 critics outside of the tent are not nearly as dangerous as one critic inside the tent, and he knows this from what you did, Michael Cohen, from what me and others did in going and telling the truth about the things that we witnessed. But I've got to imagine he's vastly more worried about Elon Musk because Musk also is the richest man in the world and has the ability to take his disclosures to a level heretofore unseen. And so I think it's more than just a squabble. I think it has the potential to be a fundamental schism within the party right now. And a lot of that is going to be determined in the next few days in terms of both how Elon and the president handle themselves.
It's very funny because as I was watching, for example, Fox News, they turn around and they make it as if this is all established by the Democrats, that, the Democrats are truly enjoying this. Sure, Democrats, like Republicans, like to see a good fight, especially an internal fight. But I like how they're trying to paint that this is a Democratic pushed feud between the two. What's your take on that?
I think that there's a lot of fear within the Republican Party about what this means. They know this means something very, very significant, and I think there's an inclination to try to downplay it if they can. And I think you'll see that with Republican members of Congress as well. They are going to be very afraid to pick sides in this struggle, and so they will try to downplay it, and they will try to delay having to do that. But what's very striking to me, Michael, is if this does continue, and if Elon Musk continues to push back against Donald Trump, there is a rare opening for potential insight and accountability to be shown on uh, some of the misconduct inside of this administration. And we've not really had many opportunities for daylight and for folks within the party to shine a light on the things that are happening inside the administration, including abuses of power. But this might create one of those openings, in particular, because it might create air cover for some Republican members of Congress who've grown frustrated with the administration to be able to exercise some of that oversight into things the administration's doing. It's probably too early to say, but it could very well go down that road. And I think that's what supporters of the president are afraid of.
I agree with you on that. Now, given your experience with the Department of Homeland Security and your deep knowledge of disinformation threats, how concerned should we all be about two powerful figures like Musk, richest man in the world, and Trump, most powerful man in the world, weaponizing their platforms against each other, right? One owns X, the other Truth Social. Could their feud spill into something that undermines public trust or even more?
It certainly could. I mean, both of these men sit on extraordinary reserves of data of millions of Americans, and in some way, shape, or form, can touch the data of almost every single American in this country. Now, I think 10 years ago, you would have said, well, it's a conspiracy theory to think either of them would weaponize that access. The president of the United States complies with the law, and the world's richest man is going to comply with the law. But that rule book has been thrown out the window in the past few months. We have seen extraordinary violations of Americans' rights, and not least of which is the case that I'm dealing with the president, is he's signed an executive order to investigate me by name and has directed his agencies to go investigate me without any evidence of a crime. That is definitionally an attack on free speech because he's doing it because I was a critic of his. And so we've already seen the president's inclination towards illegality when it comes to using the data and powers under his remit. I don't know what we'll see with Elon Musk, but certainly he's trying to use the prospect of revelations about Donald Trump as leverage. But that, I think people will also be watching carefully to see, well, what does this mean about the companies that Elon oversees and potential protection of data there? So, regardless of where you stand on this squabble, this is something to be worried about here is that, a president and a billionaire wield so much control and power that extends beyond that.
Yeah, true. Now, Miles, after calling Trump a clear and present danger to U.S. democracy, he and his goons, they smeared you as a liar and a fraud. So let me get into this for a second. What is it that they're so desperate to shut you up about? What specifically did you say that hit a nerve inside the White House, inside the war room?
I think the thing that the president was most upset about 7 years ago from my original disclosures, and he remains upset about, is that I disclosed that most of the people around him in his cabinet, especially in the national security portion of the cabinet, felt like the president was impulsive and reckless and was making decisions that were, in many cases, potentially unconstitutional. And I felt like, even though I'm a lifelong Republican, it was very important for the voters to know that before they made any decisions about whether to fire or rehire Donald Trump. And he was infuriated by that. He didn't want people to know that his own lieutenants were witnessing misconduct and were willing to call it out. And I think to this day, he still believes that he lost the 2020 election in part because so many people, not just me, but after I came forward, many other people, yourself included, you had stepped forward and people from inside the administration to talk about who he really was. And it became the ultimate political liability, and he lost re-election. And I think he hasn't forgiven that. Similarly, with my colleague Chris Krebs, who was also targeted by an executive order for an unlawful investigation. Chris's crime was that he said that the 2020 election was not stolen. Both of us were Trump appointees. Both of us are still conservatives. But Chris had no choice but to speak the truth. And the truth, as the nation's top election official, was no, that the election wasn't stolen, that it was actually one of the most free and fair elections in modern history. Trump was infuriated by that. He didn't forget it. And here we are 5 years after that episode. And he's issued an order to go investigate Chris and to launch a federal investigation into his life because he spoke the truth. There is no other explanation than that these are purely vindictive investigations. But you know better than anyone, Michael, he has a very long memory when it comes to people who've defied him. And but it's one thing if it's the schoolyard bully who wants to, look into you and cause you trouble. It's something else entirely if the leader of the free world wants to use his powers and weaponize the government of the American people to go settle personal scores. That is really dangerous. It's a slippery slope, and it's deeply damaging to democracy.
Yeah, I mean, remember, there's something that I hope that you and Chris and Elon Musk are able to glean from what happened to me. Remember, what happened to me preceded everybody, including even your book, Anonymous, by 2 years. Donald Trump does not forget. And as I've said in whether it's my Substack or whether I said it to USA Today, when Donald Trump gets hit, he needs to punch back 10 times harder. And he doesn't just do it in order to satisfy his fragile ego. He also does it in order to make a demonstration out of the individual. You are now that current individual, you and Chris Krebs. I certainly was. He would hope that what they did to me would have incentivized you to keep your mouth shut, that would have incentivized Chris Krebs to keep their mouth shut. What I believe he and his goons are going to try to do to Elon Musk is going to be something of epic proportion, never seen before, not just in this country, but I believe the entire world. I mean, when you have Trump surrogates like Stephen Miller or Caroline Levitt literally going after you like you're public enemy number one, I know what it's like to be public enemy number one, right? You guys are now kind of like the Michael Cohen 2.0, 3.0, and 4.0. The question that I really don't understand, because I read the book Anonymous, why now? What exactly, you know, do they think going after you today is going to do that will have any effect, if any at all, for example, on the public, the 2026
Mhm.
midterms? I can't figure out what's the reason, what's the basis.
Yeah. Well, I think, Michael, unfortunately, it's the thing that you cited first. I think he wants to send a message to people inside the administration who are no doubt witnessing all sorts of misconduct on a daily basis. I mean, the courts, including judges he has appointed, have determined that dozens of his actions have already been unconstitutional. And I think he's worried about people, the next Chris Krebs and the next Miles Taylor inside the administration, who might blow the whistle on that misconduct. And so I think he wants to send a message that if you go do that, we will try to ruin your life. And it brings me no satisfaction to come out and say this, but one of the reasons my wife and I decided to speak out about this executive order, even though we might get punched back 10 times harder, is because it's important for people to know these are not just symbolic. Like you experienced, Michael, like we're experiencing, it has a devastating effect on the entirety of your life. I mean, this has already cost me my job. It's forced my wife, who's a stay at home mother, to go back to work with our child. We've had to start to raise a legal defense fund because we can't afford the lawyers to grapple with this situation. We've dealt with security threats and on and on. I mean, it's very real. It destroys people's lives. Now, we're lucky. We've had groups that have come forward to provide support. I mean, there's a whistleblower organization that created something called endpresidentialrevenge.org, ENV, endpresidentialrevenge.org, as a place where you can go support folks who are fighting back against this retaliation. And if it weren't for that legal defense fund, I mean, we wouldn't be able to take the actions we took this week, Michael, to try to turn this order around and to try to get the federal watchdogs to look into it because, the process can bankrupt you. And I think that's what they also want to do. They want to make an example out of folks and show how difficult it is to speak out.
Well, you would think that that had been successful in terms of what they had done to me, not just once, but twice. I was thrown in prison because another man got his pecker pulled by a porn star. I was thrown back in because I refused to sign a counterfeit document that would have caused me to waive my First Amendment, would have forced me to waive my First Amendment constitutional right. And so they put me back into solitary confinement for a total of 51 days. It's brutal. It's one thing to be, as I was as well at the beginning, on the outside, but government is so much more powerful than anybody knows until you get hit in the head with the sledgehammer of the Department of Justice, especially a weaponized justice of a weaponized Department of Justice. Now, I want to just say this, most because you publicly stated that key figures in the Department of Homeland Security, ICE, and the DOJ are weaponizing the federal government in ways that would make Nixon blush. I agree. I felt it. I lived it. When in my specific cases, I wrote in my book, Revenge, Bill Barr was in communication with the head of the Southern District of New York, Jeffrey Berman, who actually wrote about it in his book. Instead of telling the judge what was going on, he decided he was going to keep this in his back pocket so that this motherfucker could write a book and use that as a selling point. I want to just ask you, what intel do you have right now that connects those dots back to Trump himself in this new term?
Well, I am hearing from folks inside the administration that there is concern about some of these organs of state that were not weaponized in the first term being weaponized in the second term. And let me be much more specific about it. The biggest concern for a lot of folks like me that come from the national security community is that the Department of Homeland Security has a sprawling apparatus that was built after 9/11 to go counter terrorism. We got very good at identifying a foreign terrorist suspect, tagging them, tracking them, and taking them down. And you remember very well, Michael, a lot of folks in the 20 years since 9/11 have worried about, from a civil liberties perspective, whether the right protections were in place to prevent those tools from being abused by a nefarious actor. Now, I will confess to being very naive and thinking we'll never end up in a situation where we have a president that wants to abuse those counterterrorism tools to go after domestic political enemies. Like, we don't need to go over the edge because that's an outlandish scenario to think that we're going to have someone in the White House that would try to use something like the Department of Homeland Security and shift it towards political enemies. And yet, we are seeing indicators of people coming back into the United States and having their pocket litter searched and their devices searched, and that they might be tied to causes the president opposes. That's just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, I helped run this department day to day. It is 250,000 people. It is the largest law enforcement department in the United States. People think the Department of Justice is the largest. It's not. The Department of Homeland Security is the largest law enforcement department in America, and those powers are sweeping. And unfortunately, we didn't put in place sufficient safeguards to prevent those tools from being abused for political purposes. And we're only several months into this administration, but I think you have indicators like these orders against universities and law firms and individuals to think that those powers might indeed be deeply misused for those purposes. And people I know who work in that department that are career civil servants, I think are very worried about that right now, and rightfully so.
Yeah, I agree with you. Now, look, you've warned that this administration is actively dismantling safeguards in real time. What's the most dangerous thing that you've seen the White House do since Trump took office again? And how close do you think we are to not actually being able to undo them?
Yeah, I do think it is the revenge orders, Michael, and I don't just mean for myself. I I think there's a level of social fear that's been created in the second term that never existed in the first term because there has been so much punitive action taken. I'll give you a really specific example that I've been talking about the past few days. Is I'm speaking at an event in a major U.S. city in a few weeks, a fundraiser for this legal defense fund, and so we're trying to get everywhere we can to get people to sign up for endpresidentialrevenge.org and to help out folks that are being targeted. And there was a company that was going to cater the event, and they dropped out. And I got a phone call, and I said, "Well, why did the caterer drop out?" And they said they found out the event was to, raise funds to defend folks like you. And I said, "Oh, okay, so it's political for them. They must be Trump supporters." And they said, "No, no, no, no. They're actually very supportive of what you're doing, but they are worried that if they cater this event, that if they get retaliated against, the president will try to deport their employees." That is the level of social fear. Is a private company doesn't even want to accept a contract to cater an event because they're worried that they might be targeted for revenge. That's how serious this is getting, and it's very widespread. And it's because people see what's happening to the law firms and to the universities and to individuals, and they don't want to be in the crosshairs. We have never seen something like that in the United States, and I think the effects on free speech are deeply pernicious. And I think it's going to lead potentially to outcomes that are irreversible. Because if this president can do it, then any president can do it. And that's what Republicans should be thinking about. I mean, my fellow conservatives out there should not cheer on Trump's retribution against his enemies, because it's just as easy now for a Democratic president to come in and use the same tools to go after institutions that they support and to go after people that who they don't want targeted.
But remember, I tried. Me, Michael Cohen, I tried as the first political prisoner held by this country because Trump, using Bill Barr, a willing and complicit bloviated scumbag for an attorney general, decided that they were going to weaponize the Department of Justice and incarcerate me, destroy my entire life. I yelled from the rooftops till I became hoarse. I did never wanted to see anything like this ever happen to anyone else ever again. And when I see what they're doing to you, when I see what they're doing, for example, to Chris Krebs, when I see what they're going to do to Elon Musk and others, I just wish that people would have heeded my warning. And for whatever reason, it's like all of a sudden I start watching, as commentators are talking about it, as if this isn't just a rerun, a bad movie rerun of Trump's presidency 1. Now it's presidency number 2. And the bigger problem that you have is you have a worse group of enablers right now in the administration. People like J.D. Vance, Josh Hawley's, Marjorie Taylor Greene's, and so many others pushing these authoritarian policies under the guise of law and order. Is that coordinated messaging, or are we just looking at the full fascist playbook in motion?
I think you're looking at people responding through fear, and and here's one of the best ways you can see it is the content of their messages. And you saw this as far back as the very first cabinet meeting in the Trump administration. If listeners remember, Donald Trump went around the table, and almost every single cabinet secretary gave these sort of bizarrely effusive reviews that the president was what he was doing, and how it was extraordinary, and they're all praying for him, and it was. I think Americans have never seen anything quite like that, and there were only two people at the table who didn't offer deeply effusive and glowing praise for the president, and one was my former boss John Kelly, and one was Jim Mattis, who was Secretary of Defense, because these are two men who led the troops, and they know their responsibility is not praising the president, but managing their workforce to protect the American people. And now, I didn't think we would even see it get more lugubrious than that, but you do. I mean, you read these messages, and people are heaping praise on the president around him in ways that you see only lieutenants in autocratic regimes do, and it's eerie, and it's deeply Orwellian. I wanted to ask you, Michael, because this is such a potentially pivotal moment these next few days, if the president's biggest supporter in the country does break from him, I'm curious to ask you what you think that order of operations is if they try to exact revenge against Musk like they have you, me, and a number of other institutions. How do you see this playing out potentially? What would their playbook be if they wanted to go destroy him?
Yeah, and it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. Because right now, I promise you, I know all of the actors that are there. I know exactly what they're trying to do and what they intend to do. They are right now scurrying through all of the legal possibilities within which to attack Elon Musk and the various companies. All right, fellas, look, let's cut the crap. You're in the mood, the lights are low, the music's on point, and suddenly, well, your little general decides taking the night off. Yeah, it happens. It's like trying to start a car with no gas. It's frustrating. It's humiliating. And honestly, it's kind of tragic. But here's the thing. You don't have to suffer through that sad sitcom anymore because Hims is in the game now. So men, if ED is getting you down, you need Hims to help you get your confidence and, well, other things back up. I mean, we're talking personalized, doctor-trusted treatments like Viagra, Cialis, even the chewable tablets, all available for up to 95% less. Yeah, 95% less than what you pay for at the pharmacy. And the best part? No awkward doctor's office, no pharmacy side-eye, no insurance hoops. It's all online, done from your couch, which, well, let's be honest, it might already be your battlefield or your disappointment. So you just fill out an intake form. It's easy stuff. And a real medical provider figures out the best treatment plan for you. And if prescribed, it ships discreetly and directly to your door for free. HIMSS is changing the way men deal with ED. And thank God, because the old way, it sucked. But this is fast, it's private, it's effective, and it works. So let's get real. This isn't just about performance. No, it's about taking control, about feeling like you again, and showing up when it matters. So start your free online visit today at hims.com/Cohen. That's HIMS.com/Cohen for your personalized ED treatment options. And the featured products include compounded products which are not approved nor verified for safety, effectiveness, or quality by the FDA. Prescription required. See website for details, restrictions, and important safety information. Price varies based on product and subscription plan. You already are seeing it where Trump talks about the EV mandate. He's going to turn around and claim that under the previous administrations, Elon Musk was successful in basically ripping off the United States government, the American people, $7,500 per electric vehicle, and they're going to attempt to claw it back. They're going to go on and they're going to claim that billions of dollars are being wasted, all right, on the various different programs from Starlink all the way to his SpaceX program, and that he's once again ripped off the American people, which of course is why he's the richest man in the world, and on and on. They're going to claim that, for example, they inserted some form of a program, which we know they did through Doge with Social Security, that gives them the ability to access data on all Americans. They're going to claim that that's treason. And they're going to even probably go so far as to make a claim that he's doing it for the Chinese government. They're going to make the most outlandish claims possible. And I want to sort of put this forth as my prediction that unless Elon Musk learns how to strategize and how to fight this Trump playbook, he's going to get decimated. They're going to go after not just his personal wealth, not just the businesses, as we've already heard people like Steve Bannon say that they need to take SpaceX and other companies like Neuralink or Starlink. They need to take those for the American people under national security. They're going to go after every aspect, and they're going to look to not just take his money and his businesses, but his freedom as well. And he does not know how to fight what I refer to as political guerrilla warfare. And that's what's coming against him. You're kind of fortunate, Miles, in a very weird and a very dystopian way. You see, I was, for example, number 25 on Trump's enemies list. Thanks to people like you and Chris Krebs, I got pushed down further and further down that line. So for that, I say thank you, Miles. You're a good man. Elon Musk has pushed you and everybody else way down because at the end of the day, with all due respect to Anonymous, which, by the way, was a great book, and to all of the comments that you've made, in comparison to what Elon Musk, the damage that he can do to Trump and to the GOP, nobody else is shit. He doesn't really care. So there's also not enough, one second, Miles, there's also not enough resources. They don't have enough resources to start going after everybody. They can't go after Elon Musk and simultaneously go after you and Chris under the same guise of, everybody is disloyal. Everybody is looking to hurt the national security. You can't play that card too often, but Elon is the big fish right now.
I wonder if you think, Michael, that in the course of them undertaking, the actions that you just spelled out, which of course would be blatantly illegal and unconstitutional to take all of these retributive actions against someone like Elon Musk, uh, does that cause them to overplay their hand in such a way that it gives the courts the perfect opening to come and shut down this revenge campaign? I mean, is that in your mind the ideal outcome of how this would end? Is that this abuse of power goes so far that it then so obviously has to be reined in?
Except, once again, you and too many others are relying upon the judiciary to be the savior of our democratic republic. I don't have the same positive feeling that clearly you and others do. I've been the victim of a weaponized Department of Justice. I have been before what I would call a scumbag judge who was in on the whole fucking thing. All right. And as far as I'm concerned, there are a multitude of judges. We've seen them in many of their decisions as it relates to different Trump lawsuits and so on, whereby they don't care. They're all in for Trump. They're all in for MAGA. And you know what? If they stretch the law, they're willing to do it. Ultimately, as you said before at the very beginning of this show, thank God for certain individuals and certain groups that will come up and help you to fight for it, to fight for your rights. But at the end of the day, here's something that I say regularly. Elon Musk may be the richest man in the world, but you're never richer than the government. Let me tell you one other thing. He may be, the richest man in the world, but he's not nearly as powerful as the president of the United States. And that's why I'm saying that they are right now scheming with Steve Bannon right there at the helm, with the orchestra, with the stick, the conductor stick, and he's using the DOJ and others, whether it's Pam Bondi or Todd Blanche or Emil Beauvais or Kash Patel, as the orchestra. He's waving that stick, and they are going to come up with a tune. That's where I say Elon Musk needs to understand what's called political guerrilla warfare. He's never, ever seen anything like what's going to be coming down the road. I do want to then just jump back into this and ask you, because you worked alongside officials who knew that Trump was unstable and unfit in the first term, yet everybody stayed. What does that say about the culture of complicity in DC? And how much of it is just fear versus career ambition?
I think the two are actually so deeply intertwined. Is, people are of course afraid of speaking out and, being attacked and being humiliated publicly. But there's something deeper than that. Is, these officials, their whole careers become intertwined within the party, and they see their existence as dependent on it. And, they can't imagine rebuilding their lives outside of the party. And, someone once described this to me, I thought, in a very good way. And it was Adam Kinzinger, and he and I were down in South Carolina. And, we had this same conversation. I said, Adam, gosh, so many of our friends in Congress that are Republicans think the same thing that we do and are worried about the president's misconduct, and they think he's abusing his power, and they think he's unfit for office, and they're not saying anything. And I said, do you think they're worried that they'll end up like us and have threats to their families and to their physical security? And Adam said, no, no, I think it's worse than that. And I said, worse? What could be in their minds worse than having their families attacked with violent death threats, and and having to get security for their children? And he said they are more afraid of getting kicked out of the tribe than of death. And I've often pointed to this bit that Jerry Seinfeld used to do that sort of exemplifies that. Is Jerry Seinfeld used to open his comedy sets, and he would say, that a survey came out in the United States of America's top fears, and their number one fear was public speaking, and their number two fear was death. And this is true. And so Seinfeld would then say, so it's like your average American would rather be in the casket than delivering the eulogy. And I think that's what you're seeing in Washington with people in power, is they would rather be caught dead than speaking up, because they are worried that they will get booted out of the tribe forever. And they see that banishment as worse than death. And that's no exaggeration because, folks like you and I have dozens and dozens, hundreds of friends that are in these positions, many cases former friends who feel the same way as we do. But that fear of getting pushed out of the tribe to this day keeps them silent and keeps them complicit. And the only way to counter that, the only way is you have to show people the water's warm on the other side, that there's air cover, that they'll not be alone when they come out. I mean, I can remember sitting with you for lunch in New York City, Michael, and I can remember you saying that and actually being so deeply humane and genuine about the things that we were going through when we came forward and saying, look, there is life after this. There are people on the other side. There are new friends that you make when you decide to speak out and come forward. Sure, it's going to be turbulent and there's a lot of rocky stuff that happens, but it's all about showing people, hey, it is not the end of your life. And in fact, it's the freest you will ever feel if you relieve your conscience of the burden of having witnessed that wrongdoing and done nothing. And I think that's as true today as it was then.
Yeah, except the problem is that these folks that feel that way, that they would rather stay into that group than to be excommunicated, rather die than be excommunicated from the group. That's the same horse shit that I heard, Nazis say at the Nuremberg trials, right? That, this was my job and,
Yeah.
I was just following orders. It doesn't really work that way. I wanted to ask you, though, what was your tipping point? Your moment of moral rapture when you knew that you couldn't stay silent anymore? What's and more importantly, what's your advice to these feckless assholes that are still in there watching this horror show from the inside?
Yeah. Well, let me start with the second one is my advice to them would be this is a moment of choosing, and history is going to look back very, very unkindly on the persecution of Americans by their fellow Americans with the powers of government. And there will probably be deep legal consequences and reputational consequences for those people in the long term. So if they can't be persuaded to do the right thing for the right reasons, then I would say for their own self interest, they should probably consider either leaving this show or stepping forward and telling folks what they've undoubtedly witnessed, which is the effort to subvert the Constitution to attack Americans' fundamental rights. And so that's piece number one. Piece number two, the breaking point for me was very personal. I mean, there were a lot of very concerning things that we witnessed, a lot of attempts to do things that were illegal that we persuaded the big boss to turn around and not do. But for me, it was I was on the other side of the world. I was in Australia for a meeting with foreign allies, and a mentor of mine in the Republican Party, John McCain, had just passed away from a brain tumor. And you, of course, remember, Michael, that he had been deeply critical of the president in that time period. And he was one of the few
Mm-hmm.
people in the party that was willing to stand up to him. And I had worked with him for a long time as a junior staffer on Capitol Hill, always had admired him. And then I was glad someone in the party was holding the president's feet to the fire. Well, John McCain passes away. And of course, all across the country, the flags are lowered to half staff, which is what happens when a sitting U.S. senator dies, is we honor them in their passing. And I get a phone call at 3 a.m. in Australia from the White House that the president wants to order us at the department to tell every federal building in America to raise the flags back up. And there were a lot of better reasons to snap during the Trump administration. But in that moment, I felt like a bad man was stomping on the grave of a good one. And we, of course, persuaded them not to go forward with that order. But I got up and I just started writing about what I was seeing, what I was experiencing, and why I felt like people needed to understand how bad it was getting on the inside. But it was that episode. It was that just small moment of cruelty that showed me this is not an aberration. This is the whole thing. The cruelty is the point, and we've got to do something about that.
Yeah, and so it was. Meanwhile, I want to ask you something which goes back to your position at DHS, because you kind of just brought it up. Trump's second term immigration blueprint includes detention camps, mass roundups, even the possibility of deputizing the National Guard. From your experience at DHS, is that even logistically possible? And how many red lines would have to be crossed to make this real?
It is possible, and it is worth people being concerned about because it was attempted in the first go around. As I can remember before a State of the Union address, that he wanted to include language in the address to invoke what's called the Insurrection Act, which gives the president the ability to deploy the US military on US soil to enforce US law, which is otherwise forbidden by the Posse Comitatus Act. And we persuaded him. We rushed there as they were practicing the speech and persuaded them to pull that out of the address. But we came very close to him saying he wanted to go do that and he was going to go deploy U.S. troops to the border. But the even bigger concern than the idea of hundreds of thousands of US troops at the border enforcing US law is that that would then become something he could easily do in any American city after that. There would be no limit to it. And officials were very concerned about that. It wasn't just me. I mean, after I left, we later found out the same thing happened again. And Mark Esper, then Secretary of Defense, had to persuade him not to do the same thing and go deploy 200,000, troops down to the border. And everyone was worried about that desire to use the U.S. military in this quasi-autocratic fashion as the president's personal enforcers. And again, it sounds so outlandish to say out loud, but this was real. This was a real thing that we dealt with and a real thing we shot down. And I think people are reasonably worried about it happening in this second administration, not just to go enforce immigration law, but to go further down that slope and to go, enforce other laws in U.S. cities and to go after mayors he doesn't like and judges he doesn't like. This gets us into really, really scary territory. And, Michael, you're a legal expert. You know that once something like that happens, I mean, the rule of law is toast. It is very hard to come back from a president unilaterally enforcing the law and being judge, jury, and executioner with the military on American streets. It's something we've never witnessed. It's something we've only ever seen happen in banana republics overseas. And we could be one order away from it, and that's where we were in the first term. Is him wanting to sign that order, him wanting to have the White House counsel's office drafted up, and it was only a handful of folks each time that would convince him not to do it. But I don't know if those folks are around anymore. And I'd be curious to see if you think
we don't have those folks.
do you think, Michael, that what would you peg the odds of that he tries to invoke the Insurrection Act? And you know the man very well. I mean, I have a hard time thinking he'll be held back from that. And I would like to try to be Pollyannish about it, but I can't be. I'm quite cynical, and I think there's very little holding him back from doing that, other than just political timing and convenience.
Absolutely. He will do it. If that is going to be the only option for him, and it's an option that makes it expeditious, 100% he will attempt to do it. And the worst part is that the enablers, the acolytes, the sycophants that are there, the loyalists, they're not going to hold him back, as several people had done during the first term. But I also want to follow up and ask you here. Back in 2018, you were one of the only insiders to call out the family separation as state-sponsored child abuse. Is the current administration planning to revive that policy, or you think that they're going for something even more extreme?
I'm surprised they haven't, because after we convinced him to rescind the policy, which was a very hard thing to do, he was really reluctant. We went to his children to convince him to rescind it. He finally did. But then
Jesus.
he so deeply regretted it that probably in a dozen meetings after it had been rescinded, he would talk about how he wanted to put it back in place but put it on steroids. He wanted to go so much harder and to use that device to rip apart families, to create leverage, basically to scare people from taking that journey up to the border. I had said that it was my expectation he would come back in and do exactly that, re-implement the policy, put it on steroids. They have not yet done that. And I think in part because Stephen Miller and others understand that from a PR perspective, it was a nightmare for them. And that if they can get the job done with some of these other heavy handed tactics, that might be better. But I still think there's a very uh, reasonable likelihood that they go do that. And they do it, as the president said, on steroids, and probably using some additional cruel tactics. I mean, this is going to sound really disgusting to say, but this is true. Is there had been conversations about using there are these devices, crowd control devices that law enforcement has developed in recent years that are like kind of like heat rays. You point them at a riot, and they make rioters feel like their skin is on fire and burning.
You ever wake up after a week of nonstop political chaos, look at yourself in the mirror and think, damn, I aged like a president in his second term. Yeah, well, me too. Long days, longer news cycles, and a diet that consists mostly of rage and revenge will do just that to you. That's why I gave Prolon's 5-day fasting mimicking diet a shot. And let me tell you, it's like a full body reset without the misery of actually fasting. Prolon's a plant-based nutrition program of soups, snacks, teas that keeps your body in a fasting state while still feeding you. It works at the cellular level to jumpstart rejuvenation and help your cells act like they've just had a motivational speaker and a green juice. It's real science. It's real results. And now, boom, they've rolled out the next gen 5-day program. And now, boom, they've rolled out the next gen 5-day program. It's 100% organic soups and teas, richer flavor, and ready to eat meals. So even a certain president couldn't screw it up. Developed over decades at USC's Longevity Institute and backed by legitimate top medical centers, Prolon has been shown to support biological age reduction, metabolic health, skin appearance, fat loss, and energy. Look, I did the 5-day program, and no joke, I felt better, lighter, cleaner. Now I'm all in for next gen. And here's the deal for my Mea Culpa listeners. For a limited time, you can be first in line to experience the new next gen at special savings. Prolon is offering Mea Culpa with Michael Cohen listeners 15% off site-wide, plus a $40 bonus gift when you subscribe to their 5-day program. So go now and visit prolonlife.com/Mea Culpa. That's PROLONLIFE.com/Mea Culpa to claim your 15% discount as well as your bonus gift. That's prolonlife.com/Mea Culpa. Give your body a break. It deserves it. Believe me.
And there were conversations in the first term of the administration wanting to deploy those down there. And if you've ever been down to the border, it's not like, thousands of like big, strong, burly men bursting through the gates. It is a lot of women and children. There's a lot of women and children. And to imagine that you might go deploy heat ray devices to make them feel like their skin is boiling, how could that not definitionally be considered torture? And I don't care what your opinions are on illegal immigration. You could want to close the border completely. I get it. You could want to fully reform the immigration system. It doesn't have anything to do with that. This is just sick that even officials had conversations about those things. And unfortunately, I could see conversations like that being revived.
Miles, the conversation for that laser beam, only followed after Trump's request to shoot them in the legs, right? So when you turn around and you talk about vile, right? He truly doesn't give a shit about humanity, human beings. the notion that you could shoot somebody with a laser to make their skin boil, or shoot them if they tried to come into the United States at the border. I wasn't aware that, improperly entering the country is punishable by death. Well, in Trump's world, it actually is. But the real question that this brings me to next is kind of like, let's talk strategy. First, I'm curious, what are you going to be doing on June 14th, if anything? What can Democrats and independents do to reach the so-called exhausted majority of voters who hate Trump, who hate these things that we're talking about, but don't trust the left either? Because right now, apathy is what I believe is going to sway the way that the 2026 midterm elections go.
This may sound overly simplistic, Michael, but it really always starts with taking a first step, which is signaling for people. A lot of folks are scared to even say that they disapprove of what's happening because they don't want to be attacked by friends or neighbors, or they think they might be, right? And so that's why I go back to this idea of social fear is very insidious, because if you think that you might get attacked, then who cares if someone's going to censor you? It doesn't even get to that point. You censor yourself. And so there's a lot of self censorship happening right now. How do you get around that? Well, you help people just take that first step. They don't have to go light themselves on fire at a rally, right? They don't have to go self-immolate for the cause. They can just start by doing something very simple, posting a message and saying on their Instagram, I'm kind of disturbed by all this stuff I'm seeing. I'm not good with it, right? Saying that to a friend, little gradations of that then can help you get to the point where you're, contributing to the cause of shining a light on the misconduct that we are seeing. So it starts there in very, very small ways. But there's also more ways than ever for people to fight back against things that they see as just not just morally wrong, but illegal. I mean, for instance, all of these cases that you are seeing across the country, 20 years ago, if you watched this thing happening at Harvard, you would say, well, what can I do about it? I'm just a regular American. I can't go support it. But now, in the age of social media, in the age of crowdfunding, there are very concrete ways people can get involved in these cases. They can support these organizations and they can push back on the abuses of power. I mean, you mentioned it earlier, is like the fact that my own legal defense has been crowdfunded is, first of all, I mean, we are blown away by it. But it's not something that would have been possible 20 years ago. But now someone in California and someone in Florida and someone in Ohio can help us not just defend against this action, but set a precedent that we won't allow this to happen to other people. So that's extraordinary. And I would say that folks should look for those opportunities where they can get engaged, where they can go support those causes, because it does have a very real impact. I mean, this week, we called on federal watchdogs to launch a review into that original order and the one against Chris, and to look into whether there's ongoing unconstitutional activity. We wouldn't have been able to make that legal complaint without that support. And so there are ways for people to really plug in and have a difference there. And I think there will be more of that.
But Miles, I don't mean to burst your bubble on this, because I've lived through this, and I've lived through the lies, the distortion, the weaponization of the Department of Justice. Everything is, we'll call it honky-dory while you are on the outside. And yes, thanks to all of the people who are crowdfunding and helping for you to what appears to get your justice. When I was unconstitutionally remanded, I took the case all the way to the Supreme Court of the United States. People like Lawrence Tribe, probably the most prolific constitutional law professor in the country, turned around and said, if the Supreme Court doesn't hear this case, it's simply because they're in the tank. And why did he say that? Because He believes that it is the most relevant question of the last 100 years. Question being, how improper is it for the President of the United States to call on the Attorney General of the United States to weaponize the Department of Justice to demand that a U.S. citizen waive his First Amendment constitutional right and to incarcerate an American citizen because he refuses to do so? This is a fundamental constitutional First, Fourth, and 14th Amendment violation. Supreme Court chickened out. They walked away claiming that Bivens is all but dead as a direct result of the Dobbs decision, the same decision that destroyed Roe versus Wade, saying that if you want relief and satisfaction, what you need to do is it needs to go to Congress and it should be done by the state. This is a constitutional issue. My concern for you, and I say it as a friend, my concern for you is right now, while this is in its infancy state, there's going to come a point in time, and you know that this government is going to come after you and make all these sort of allegations of impropriety, treason, as Trump called it, of sharing classified information. We saw what happened to Reality Winner. Any of that ever cross your mind?
Well, it's why we're pushing back, is we are extremely concerned by the notion that someone can say that First Amendment protected speech is a national security threat, that dissent is equivalent to espionage. And if that's allowed to stand, certainly it could mean extraordinarily grave consequences for us. But it could also mean grave consequences for untold numbers of Americans who, with the stroke of a pen, could find themselves under the same allegation and inside the same type of investigation. It sets a remarkable and dangerous and chilling precedent. And you experienced this firsthand, and I think this is, this builds upon that to show that they're willing to go even further and do it to more people. And I would give people a data point of how this has already gone much beyond us. Is the Attorney General recently issued guidance rolling back protections for journalists. So there's been these long-standing protections from DOJ that make it much harder for them to go issue warrants to go search a journalist's phones and devices. And we want it to be that way as Americans, because we want the press to be able to get information and share it with the American people. Well, they've rolled those protections back, making it easier to go after news organizations and journalists in the United States. And they used as their justification the orders against myself and Chris. So I would say to everyone, okay, you don't have to care about this guy, but your own protections to be able to hear from free and independent media are now being attacked, and they're using these orders as the justification. And again, that's just the starting point. And so this could go a lot farther. And I would agree with you, Michael. It could get a lot worse before it gets better. And so we wrestled with whether to come forward and speak about it or just keep our heads down. But to me, keeping your head down doesn't save you. It just delays the inevitable.
Yep. And let me tell you, if I can give you one recommendation, something that my lawyers, I think, improperly and wrongly suggested, is keeping your mouth shut. The more people, the more programs like Mea Culpa, we get hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people watching this episode. And I want each and every one of them, one, if you can and you're capable, please help to support this, but also support it by telling the story. We cannot, as Americans, allow things like this to happen. I yelled, I screamed so loud, I became fucking hoarse. And I wrote books about it. I went on every television station talking about it. As I sit here today and I watch what you're going through, somebody who I know, somebody who I've broken bread with, somebody that I kind of warned 2 years before you even put out your book, Anonymous, that things like this can happen in this country. Look at what's happening to me. I don't ever want to see what happened to me happen to you or anybody. Sadly, I believe that you're just one in a long line of individuals that are going to be suffering from this, including Elon Musk. Now, look, as the hour comes to an end, I'm going to give you one shot, 60 seconds here, to convince a politically checked out America to pay attention and to act. What's your pitch to them? What's at stake at 2026 and beyond if people do not show up and, more importantly, people don't speak out?
Yeah, I would say your whole livelihood is at stake. And here's why. Even if the tariffs and the other economic actions don't have an impact on the economy, I'm going to tell them what will. The consistent and persistent attacks on the rule of law, the punishment of universities and law firms and businesses arbitrarily, will fundamentally damage the world's view of whether it is safe to invest in the United States, whether this is a place where you can count on the courts and the judges and the system to function. If that confidence in America gets diminished, it will affect whether you have a job, whether you have a retirement, whether your investments end up being successful.
Mhm.
And we are already seeing some indications of that. We're seeing the United States credit getting downgraded. We're seeing foreign investment get wobbly. This is real. And if you don't care about politics and you don't care about democracy and the rule of law, the thing you should care about is your survival and your success may be dependent on what happens. And so if you haven't yet, you do need to get out there and speak up. And Michael, I am very grateful that you pointed people to out there to try to back folks like us. I mean, they can support the Legal Defense Fund. It's a nonprofit at endpresidentialrevenge.org. It's run by Whistleblower Aid, a great nonprofit organization. And I'm grateful to folks like you who've just continued to shine a light no matter what. So you set a big example for everyone.
Well, thank you, Miles. And when you're in New York, please come. Let me know in advance. Time for us to catch up on that long overdue lunch. Stay safe, my brother. Stay strong. You got a lot of people backing you. And I assure you, I assure you, the more you speak out, the more programs that you end up appearing on, and the more people that keep this in the forefront, the better likely you're going to be to avoid the repercussions, like the repercussions I suffered, which I pray to God, I do. I pray to God you know nothing from it.
I appreciate it, Michael. Thank you. Appreciate your guidance as always, and I'll see you soon. And hopefully we can chat with folks when we're together in person.
Amen. I'll see you soon.
Thank you, my friend.